for a lot of us. And when we look at the past, there's always a lot of questions, whether it's the dirt that we dig up and the things that we find in that dirt, and also the Holy Scriptures. And so, so thankful for you all taking the time to come out and be here, but especially Scott Mauser for coming all the way down from Colorado.
Thank you.
To introduce you, I'd like to introduce Pastor Richard Schlack. He's the director of the Lutheran Hispanic Missionary Institute, and Pastor Schlack was the one who contacted us and said, hey, we have an opportunity to get everyone together to learn about these topics that help us to know and also explain life and this world and our faith and the joys that we have. So, Pastor Schlack, I'd like to invite you to introduce our special guest. I do need to mention that we have several door prizes, raffle prizes, that if you haven't filled out a raffle ticket or door prize sheet, my wife, Krisha, is in the back and she has one, so you can raise your hand and she'll bring it to you. You can fill it out. And at the end of the evening, we will raffle off these amazing items, such as this DVD, Echoes of the Jurassic, and a bajillion other books. I won't read all the titles. But we have a lot of really awesome books from the Alpha Omega Institute, I believe. All right.
Good evening. It is really nice to be here. You know, when I studied at the university, I had a double major in general science and biblical languages. And this comes together, the Bible and dinosaurs.
Yes.
Scott Mauser is from the Alpha Omega Institute. You can find that online, discoverycreation.org. He's done a lot of presentations about dinosaurs and about science in general and its relationship with our faith. He's a teacher. He teaches science and religion on the middle school, as a Lutheran middle school up in Colorado. He has had a long journey of faith. He was brought up as a Christian, but as a young man, he started questioning a lot of things because he didn't see how science fit in with his faith, and he became an atheist. And when he was at his lowest ebb, he started looking into what he always thought was true with the atheism, and found that it didn't really add up scientifically. And he came back to the Lord.
Yep.
And so he has a lot to share with us today, I think. And I hope that you all will take some things home with you, kids and adults alike. So God be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us here together this evening. We ask that you would bless Scott as he presents, and bless us as well, and open our minds and our hearts so that we can learn more about your world and what you have to say to us, not only in nature but also in your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys very much for coming out. Now, I got to admit, I got this thing on my head. We've been talking Star Wars. If I start clicking and stuff, just ignore me. Okay? It's amazing to see so many kids. When I actually saw the number of kids coming, I actually talked to Pastor and said, should I do a different program? This program is primarily, it's one that I give in Phoenix at a Lutheran conference that we have there. And some of it is more elevated. Some is more difficult for children. So what we're going to do is we are going to do the adult talk. Primarily, and then hopefully parents as well, when the kiddos are asking you questions, you can kind of filter down some of the information that you learned and give you that opportunity to be that resource for your kid. So they look to you for authority on that. So, and also, as I do with all my students, my number is always available. I'm always open. I teach in many public schools, which is great for me. And so I've had the experience of really touching a lot of people and saying, you know what, if it's a legitimate question, I'm willing to talk to you about anything. Now, if we start throwing mud, I'm not really into that. But legitimate questions, I am. So when we look at this, when I set it up as how do dinosaurs fit into the Bible? And I thought that's not a really good title because it sounds like I'm forcing something that shouldn't be there to be there. And so I usually kind of subtitle it, if my clicker will work. All right. There we go. Better yet, can the Bible explain what we know about dinosaurs? Okay? So really, we need to get in the habit as we look at the world around us, we need to be able to see how it relates to Scripture. We do believe that Scripture is the Word of God, but I was questioning this. I remember when I was my sister studied French literature, sociology, and so I started reading philosophy. My background's actually in philosophy and comparative religion. Science was always a love of mine. I was supposed to go to the School of Mines, but I went to Colorado College instead to pursue philosophy and comparative religion. I started reading some really difficult philosophy or bad philosophy. Just to give you an example, the first philosophy book I read was by a gentleman by the name of Michel Foucault, and it was called Madness and Civilization. Good reading for 13-year-olds. But what I started doing is I started seeing that what I was getting at school was not the same as what I was getting in Scripture. And of course, with deferred authority, as Luther would talk about, these people that my parents were sending me to were that authority to me. And so I was trusting that they were telling me the truth. And for me, science and religion was the biggest question. Okay? And even if kids can't really talk about it, they know what we call the law of non-contradiction, that things that are telling different stories can't both be true. And so for me, my entire identity had been in Christianity, but I was starting to see things a little differently. And so for me, a main issue was the fossils. I think all kids are fascinated with dinosaurs. And for me, the dinosaurs, they're really a missionary lizard. They're a gateway for people to get evolution to our kids, and it was for me especially. And so it was really coming up between, is it the Bible or is it evolution? And I'm one of those that always I went to the source. So I read Darwin's books. I read several others. I went to my pastors. Now, I didn't have a pastor that said you just have to believe, but my pastor had no answers. My pastor had no resources. And so at this time, I started to wonder, is the Bible inerrant? And not even inerrant in the sense that, minor things that are wrong, but whole history outlines. Because if I got it wrong, these are huge questions. As C.S. Lewis said, this isn't of minor importance. It's either of ultimate importance or of no importance at all, but it's not moderately important. And so I believed that what I had believed, what I had taught, was a lie. And so I started seeing everything through an evolutionary viewpoint. And so this book I had not read at the time yet when I was going through what I went through, but it kind of distills what my thoughts were. This gentleman is Daniel Dennett, sorry, and he wrote a book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And this is what he said. He basically said, let me lay my cards on the table. If I were to give an award for the single best idea anyone ever had, I'd give it to Darwin, ahead of even Newton or Einstein and everyone else. He said, later in the book, he puts forth an analogy, and he says it's like a universal acid. Well, there we go. This clicker will start working, right? A universal acid is a liquid so corrosive that it'll eat through anything. What do you contain it in? And he said, basically, I was going to find this in the idea of Darwinian evolution, bearing an unmistakable likeness to this universal acid. Why couldn't the whole thing? The thing we don't sometimes think about, that evolution is an entire worldview. It is all-encompassing. And so it does not take subordinates. And so when we look at this was something that destroyed everything in its wake. During my time of reading, I really got into what they call the French existentialists. This is Albert Camus. He was writing up until he died in the 60s. But he wrote a book called The Myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was a guy that was cursed by the gods to roll a ball up the hill just for it to roll back down, a meaningless activity. And he had a book, and he said, this is an absurd reasoning. And what he said is there's but one truly, I am so sorry. For some reason, my connection is not working. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. And just to give you an idea, this book up here is by Goethe. Goethe was a humanist. He wrote The Sorrows of Young Werther. In the book, Werther ends up committing suicide. When I was 16 years old, I have a tattoo on my back that is of a gravestone. And across it, it says Werther. I really felt that this was my destiny. I didn't think that I was going to find, and when you dig into atheism, it truly is hopeless. So I ended up overdosing and ending up in a facility. And it was finally one person, it was a Catholic priest actually, that actually started questioning me. I was in a lockdown program for 8 weeks, and he started asking me about my atheism. And the sad thing is even according to C.S. Lewis, writing in the 60s, in the Screw Tape letters, basically makes this statement. He says, Screw Tape writes to Wormwood, he says, keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, I mean the real sciences, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about realities he can't touch and see. There have been many sad cases among modern physicists. Basically, he's writing saying science has actually turned people to God. So the information was out there. Why didn't anybody in my community have any of that information to help me? You guys, it's a huge problem. Right now, the number one reason that students give, and the Catholic priest that came to me, he was a lifeline. When I left the program, I was not a Christian. But I knew that I needed to find out more information. But I was in a situation where I thought Christianity was a lie, and then I thought atheism was a lie. I didn't want to be lied to again. I knew I was going to die. In my overdose, I had started having severe panic attacks, to the point that even though I was coming off narcotics, they were giving me Xanax because my blood pressure was so high. And I was sitting there going, what is going to happen? Number one reason students give for not responding to the gospel is evolution. And as Luther used to say, he said, if you are not fighting at the place where the devil is attacking the most, then you're denying the faith. And this is what we need to know, because these kids are told this in school year after year after year. And if you think about Hitler and the big lie, if you say it long enough, loud enough, and from a position of authority, whether or not you have proof, people believe it. And that's where it's come in a lot of things. Richard Dawkins says it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet anybody who claims to not believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. He actually goes on to say, or something worse, but I'd rather not consider that. So really, whether we have arguments or not, we are the nutty professor. Okay? We are, and I am a little nutty, but hopefully not everybody. So what happens is we have the data. Everybody has the same data, but actually we have different conclusions. So really the only thing we can bring from this is that we have different assumptions. And so we can almost reverse engineer to kind of see which one is true, evolution or creation, by looking at the predictions that they would make and seeing then if the predictions are closer to reality, then those assumptions seem to be reasonably true. Does that make sense to everybody? And so we're really fighting over the interpretation and not the data itself. Bum, bum. I'll sing to you guys. No. There we go. So again, we use the analogy of glasses, that they really do affect how we see things. I am really sorry. There we go. So again, remember the main issue, one of the entry points for me was evolution, was the fossils, was that I needed. So listen to this. George Wald is kind of an advocate for evolution. And he says, time is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, the probable virtually certain. One has to only wait. Time does the miracles. This is what is told to our kids. But when we just think about it for a second, if we think about it for a second, we can see that this is not a true statement. In my life, in my life, I could probably ride my bike 300,000 miles. I know it looks like I do every day, but am I ever going to be able to ride my bike to the moon? No. So we can take little analogies to show that, yes, things that are possible does not make things that are impossible all of a sudden possible after many years. And so when we look through this, we're going to develop 5 points that help us to understand dinosaurs in relation to the Bible. And when I developed this, I thought, I want to take it through different points in connection with the Bible. And so when we look at these points, we're going to look at them in order. Yeah, I may need you to hit enter on that. Okay, go ahead. And so, one more time. I like jumping dinosaurs. Sorry. With my little clicker, it works better. Okay? Oh, okay. Let me see. Oh, that may have helped a little. So we're going to talk about 5 different notes. We're going to talk about clever design. We're going to talk about creation, fall and judgment or catastrophic death. We're going to talk about post-flood. Are there actually reasonable historical accounts, whether in artwork or in literature or in other types of human history, that will actually tell us that they saw these animals that we call dinosaurs? Then we're going to look at 2 amazing discoveries. One is scientific corroboration of a younger Earth based on what we call radiocarbon in the fossil record in the geologic layers. And then finally, we're going to talk about, have you guys heard that we have found unfossilized dinosaur tissue? Yes. Oh, it's amazing. It is neat, and we're finding more and more of it. Okay? So when we look at this, creation, clever design, and stasis. Okay? Clever design, stasis means just things stay the same. They don't change a lot. Okay? So when we look at creation, the first thing, have you guys ever been in a situation where the one little thing that you need to work doesn't work? And it's really frustrating, okay? So when we look at Scripture, we can say, and God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and he saw that it was good. And so we come from a standpoint of ultimate belief in creation. And Paul, when he's talking to the Romans, he says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, the attributes, the invisible qualities, that we are truly without excuse. Well, is that the case? And so when we look at this, we're going to look at several different areas. Okay? First, the design argument. I'm going to give you a quick design argument. And it goes like this, similar to a blueprint. Thank you. Premise 1, every design had a designer. Go ahead. Number 2, biologic systems have highly complex design. And number 3, therefore, the biologic systems had a designer. So when we look at this, do we really see that? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at some information. Okay. When we look at DNA, DNA is truly digital code. It is analogous to language. And so this is basically what makes you. So I don't know if you know, but they're looking at making computers out of DNA that are actually looking at making the processing. Because we are created by that DNA. That code that is billions of letters long is what makes you you. We're finding out, though, that it's even more complex than that. We have what's called epigenetics. It now looks like your DNA is just the blueprint, but there's another system above it that actually interacts with the environment and can turn genes on and off. It is so complex. Okay? So when we look at this, organic life requires information-rich processing systems. That means you need systems that understand language, code, instructions, which points to meaning. How did this arise from something that had no meaning? The highest information density known to us is that of DNA. And so if we look at it compared, now it's interesting because now scientists are saying that materialism may be able to answer some things, but it can never answer what they think now has become the fundamental part of biology, and that's information. It's that code. It's that meaning. It's not just the matter. And so statistical information in 1 cubic centimeter, and this is, has anybody heard of a zettabyte? This is a zettabyte, or over a zettabyte. So if we take it in comparison, if we have the Earth, and then we have again the moon, this is called a lunar unit, so it's about 238,000 miles. If we would put it, this part of my presentation's a little bit aged. If we put that on a disk, that disk, for that enough information, that would stack up almost 1.5 times to the moon. That is a huge amount of information that is contained in your DNA that supposedly happened by chance. You guys, we have atheists. A guy by the name of Antony Flew was actually looking at the design argument. He was the prominent atheist that people would go to for arguments. He became a believer, not a Christian. He became a theist, more of a deist, but he said it's impossible. There's also what are called encode projects. They're trying to see if DNA is 100% useful.
We're going to try changing the battery. Meanwhile, just point to him when you want to change it.
Sounds good. So with the encode, evolutionists were saying that because it happened by evolution, not all of the genome would be usable, would be working. And actually they found out over 80%, and then further studies, they believe 100% of the genome is actually doing something. There's no junk DNA in it. And so when we look, go ahead. We know intelligence is the only known cause of complex, functionally integrated information systems. That is all. We know that code and language only comes from mind. So if we want to do the scientific method, we see that's all information comes from. Okay? So it's interesting, how many are familiar with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence? If we use their guidelines, they would admit an intelligent design. It's interesting how they change the rules according to what they're looking at, because it shows that in the body is complex design. Okay? So, and this talks about, we'll skip this because with the problems I'm having, I'm running out of time. So when we look at comparing, we have the tree of life, and this is basically what evolution looks at. They say we have a last universal common ancestor, but everything you see in reality comes from some branching of that, some evolution, change, minute changes. Do we see this actually in the fossil record? So the evolutionary predictions would be apparent design, because it's not true design because there's no designer. It just appears to be designed. Lowest life would be simple. There would be constant change because we have to get what we see around us to be alive. So we have to come from the beginning of life all the way to everything you see around. There would be lots of links. If we look at a creationist prediction for these fossils, it looks more like an orchard. We see that we have variation within themes, if you want to call it. We see dog kinds, the ceratopsians, we have different types of animals. And so the creationist would look at it and he would say there would be actual design. We would actually see complexity everywhere, and that we would actually have stasis, meaning things are relatively conservative. They don't become other items. They may vary within, what type of dog, and they would be distinctive kinds. Okay? And so when we look at this, which prediction is borne out by the evidence? So if we look at the different predictions and we compare them, we basically have apparent versus actual design. We have lowest life simple, complex life everywhere, constant change, stasis not change, lots of links, and distinctive kinds. Okay? So when we start looking at it, if we look at the very bottom of the geologic column, these are the items that are supposed to be the simplest. And actually what we find is they have some of the most complex features that we've ever seen on Earth. We look at the trilobite. The trilobite, I hope in heaven we get to see a lot of these creatures on the new heaven and the new Earth. They are amazing. But when we look at the trilobite eye, some trilobites have over 3,000 lenses. We have similar ones found in the Cambrian area, similar to a robber fly. Can you imagine if you're an engineer that you have 300 cameras or 3,000 cameras, and the animal that's looking through that has to be able to garnish the information to be able to live? Wow. That is a lot of complex math. That's a lot of heavy-duty engineering. And they've even said that when we look at it, it goes all the way down into the Cambrian, over 3,000 lenses, looks like a squashed eye from a recent fly. And these were in Australia. It says their discovery reveals that some of the earliest animals possessed very powerful vision. And we still have the same eyes today. So it seems like a lot has not changed within the evolutionary time frame. Then we have what is called the Cambrian explosion. How many have heard of the Cambrian explosion? Okay, a couple of you. And what happened is the area in the rock record that is underneath, great book on this is called Darwin's Doubt, but the layers, as you can see under here, these layers are what is supposed to produce the ancestors for all these different animal types. All of a sudden, in a split second in geologic time, pretty much every body type comes into existence without anything before it. So we have an explosion of life. Really, when we look at it, it fits very much with creation, and evolution has much difficulty with it, because how did we get all of these designs with nothing prior? And hopefully that concept is understood. Okay? And we look at the design and things like the bacterial flagellum. And we have this that it kind of is a bacteria that swims through what we would call almost like a peanut butter kind of consistency. But we have certain things that you cannot do without. If any part is missing, you don't have a functional tail that actually moves it. And this thing goes at 100,000 RPM, and it can stop within a quarter turn. We have incredible complexity in design in the simplest of animals. Okay, and this is just more showing how complex it is, the names that it's given, similar to engineering. And I think we need to remember, for evolution to work, it's happening on the microscopic, on the level where part of the DNA is being altered. And all of a sudden, these great things are coming out of it. You start seeing the impossibility of that. Well, so when we look at the lowest life simple, we see that we have complex life everywhere. We have different forms of life. We have insects, we have mammals, we have reptiles, but they are all complex at the very beginning. We're going to also see that we have basically things aren't changing. This is actually what is called a coelacanth. A coelacanth was actually an index fossil, meaning that it was determined that if you found a coelacanth, it was at least this old. Well, they had a problem with this because it was extinct for supposedly 70 million years until some fishermen in the Indian Ocean pulled up one. Okay? So just because we do not find things in the fossil record does not mean that we have an extinction event. All it means is that they're not appearing in the rock record. So obviously, if we have coelacanth today, we've had them for the last 70 million years, even though they haven't been in the fossil record. So when we hear about these mass extinctions, about all these different animals, we need to remember that things are staying the same. And I really do apologize that my system is not working for everyone. So when we look at other things as well, we look, and there's a great book that discusses, whoa. Okay, well, did you all get that? I hope you all caught that. We will move on. We got us there and we're good. So we'll look at now lots of links. If evolution is true, what we have to see is we have to see transitional forms. Now, they've moved to new systems called clades, which are statistics. But statistics don't have babies. Animals have babies. And so it's almost pulls away from the idea. These are the kind of things that we would expect to see. Now, this is one of my favorites coming up. I love birds, but I would never want that bird. Okay? Imagine that duck on your front yard. You'd pull the kids inside. There was a conference held in 1980, and the conference to try to understand, we see changes like in the size of bird beaks and other things, but can we take that to say cats can turn into dogs? These are scientists that said, no, they can't. We're not finding any evidence for it. And so when we look at the dinosaur record, when we actually look at the dinosaur family tree, when you see the black here, that's actual finds that we have found. The clear areas are suggested links, but it's clear because they have never found anything in those. One of the gentlemen that's from Johns Hopkins that actually worked on, we'll get to a quote to his, called the Dinosauria, he says, there are none. There are no ancestors to my knowledge. So more the family tree looks like this. When they come on the record, when they come into the fossil record, they're dinosaurs. When they leave, they're dinosaurs. They're T-Rex, they leave T-Rex. Okay? And so when we look at this, come on. When we see a lot of these different dinosaurs, they are variations like we see with dogs nowadays. We're finding out that many of these animals are different ages, different sex. They're finding out that they're different development patterns. And this is actually another family tree that kind of shows number fossils that we have. And again, 0 for the number of links and common ancestors. We have not found them. This is why we always ask, what's the evidence? Because people will tell you a lot of things, but you need to ask them, why do you believe that? And so this is from the interview with a guy by the name of Dr. Weishampel. And he says, from my reading of the fossil record of dinosaurs, no direct ancestors have been discovered for any dinosaur species. Alas, my list of dinosaurian ancestors is an empty one. He is the authority. He wrote or he edited what is called the Dinosauria, which actually puts all the finds kind of in an encyclopedic manner. Okay? And so when we look at this, we have no links in the fossil records. This is coming from the experts. And so if we look at the predictive capability, the prediction of creationists actually fit what we see in the fossil record. That meaning that our assumptions seem reasonable and probable. Okay? And again, both evolution and creation in the sense of ultimate proof are unprovable. Okay? But we can come to reasonable conclusions, and we can come to very probable, beyond a reasonable doubt kind of conclusions. So prominent evolution evaluations. Stephen Jay Gould was at Harvard, and he said the history of most fossil species includes 2 features: stasis. Most species exhibit no directional change, meaning I'm not turning into another animal, not turning into a bird if I'm a dinosaur. It says, during their tenure or their life on Earth, they appear in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. There's no change over, in some cases, in their idea, hundreds of millions of years. Okay? Morphological or the physiological change is limited and directionless. And also sudden appearance. We talked about the explosion. All of a sudden they weren't there, and now they're there. Boy, that looks like creation to me. But when it looks at that, in any local area, species does not arise gradually by steady transformation, which is needed by evolution. It appears all at once and fully formed. And he is definitely not a Christian. Okay? He unfortunately has passed away. One of his cohorts said 120 years of paleontological or dinosaur research, it has become abundantly clear the fossil record will not confirm Darwin's predictions. It's not a problem with a poor record. He basically says, simply shows the prediction is wrong. The observation that species are amazingly conservative, they don't change, and static entities throughout long periods of time has all the qualities of the emperor's clothes. Everyone knew it, but preferred to ignore it. Paleontologists faced with the unwanted record or the obstinate record, refusing to yield Darwin's predicted pattern, they simply looked the other way. It didn't fit their paradigm. Okay? So when we look at this, we're going to look at a couple of dinosaur designs. So we look at some of these amazing creatures. This is Diplodocus. He's one of my favorites. My actually favorite is the next one we're going to get to, because the first one was actually found in my hometown. So it's pretty cool. But when we look at Diplodocus, we see amazing design. And it's kind of interesting because it also shows that something was different in the past. I do this for some of my student lectures, but there seems to be an abundance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the fossil record, which causes gigantism. So we actually have big dinosaurs, but we also have big beavers. We have beavers that are bigger than grizzly bears. 9 feet tall and a 1,500-pound beaver. You give them your trees. We have millipedes that are over 9 feet long. We have dragonflies that have 2-foot wingspans. God, that was so interesting. So we see a lot of things. And so these animals were created for size. And so when we look at the Diplodocus, and this is actually a great book. I think we brought it. No, we didn't. Dinosaurs, if anybody wants, this is a great textbook. Okay? But if we look at it, secular paleontologists concluded that sauropods possessed a set of 7 unique characteristics. Now remember, evolution doesn't have a mind. And for these animals to live, you have to have all these qualifications. We'll get to it. It's called irreducible complexity, similar to a mousetrap. If you have the number of components on a mousetrap, you take one away, do you catch mice? No, it's totally useless. There is a limited number of things that are required. Evolution has no mind. It can't think. It's action, or it's accident and mutation. But these are the 7 characteristics, kind of like an owner's manual. I have a VW Bug. Show you my mechanical skills. It's still not running. Okay? But when we think about it, we basically, sufficient body size to support a long neck. And it sounds, the hard part with this is it sounds reasonable because we see design everywhere. But we have to remember it's a mindless designer and how possible for it. And when we're working on the level of DNA, the code is what we're actually hitting that has to change to make things. How reasonable is that? Okay? They had a skeletal stability through the quadrupedal stand, so they had the 4 legs. Okay? And they even had locking mechanisms. Many of the large dinosaurs, we believe in their legs, had locking mechanisms to help with support. Okay? They all had small heads, and it's interesting, when you find them in the fossil records, most of their heads are ripped off. That's why we got Brontosaurus, because Brontosaurus, they had the wrong head on the right, the wrong head on the wrong body. So they had 10 or more vertebrae. They had elongated vertebrae. They have an air sac, and this is up for debate, breathing system. And they were designed with holes in their spinal column, in their vertebrae, or else they wouldn't have been able to lift their neck. So when you actually go to and you look at museums, you'll actually find signs that they were designed similar to a mousetrap. All of these characteristics had to be there. This animal could not survive. Okay? And I know you think, well, 7, that's not a lot. We're just talking about minimal. When we look at the actual animal, so much more. But we look at just design that we see, and we see similar structures where in the animal, we have similar structures with the ark with displacing weight that we find in the making of bridges, going back even to the Roman times. Now, this is my favorite dinosaur. This is, whoops. Have you seen Jurassic Park? He's the one that gets to sneeze on the little girl. Oh, yeah. And the very first one was found in 1903 in Grand Junction, Colorado, on what we call Riggs Hill. It was found by a guy by the name of Elmer Riggs. And when we look at it, and these are actually some of his drawings, but when we look at the neck of this animal, we find out that similar to what you would see in a car, and not anymore, more trucks than that, but you have what we would call leaf springs. Very similar to where these are down the front to basically, can you imagine having a long neck like that if you didn't have the proper restraints within it? We also find out that going up through the neck, we actually have 2 tendons, similar to what we see when we look at different cranes. Because if you have just one tendon, you have a lot of problems. We have specific design that allows this animal to be able to work in ways similar to a crane, similar to be able to move around, but this happened by chance and accident. These are incredible designs. I have a student that went into what they call biomimicry, and where they're trying to find out how to make better things based on what they see in nature. We can't do it, but nature did it better. The mindless did it better than the mind did. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Okay, but they were engineered for size. We look at like the ceratopsians. So when we look at Triceratops, and this is fascinating, most of you may not have known this, but we actually found in Canada basically a bone bed of 10,000 plus ceratopsians buried in a very limited area. And it's very interesting because there's no juveniles. There's no young ones. It seems, and it's very different for a herd of animals of that size not to have any young ones. It seems like they had been weeded out. Okay? Either by, as I would think, floodwaters and that. But we're finding amazing finds with these creatures. And I apologize again. So what we have with the Triceratops, when we look at some of the design, especially in the head, the teeth actually had 5 different layers of different, if you want to, they had basically different levels of hardness. And so they actually would sharpen the way that they go. The bite of a Triceratops, they believe, and they have found it actually in some finds, that they would be able to chew through a tree trunk. They had vice grip with the frill behind and the muscles coming down. The teeth, the way that they could shear because of their components, made them amazing. They could eat anything. Okay? And then most scientists believe now that when we look at the frill was a regulator of temperature. So this was a biofeedback system so that the animal wouldn't overheat. So these are very complicated systems when you look at that. Okay? And so when we move on, we find that really when we look at the design, when we look at creation, when we look at what we have in these systems, it's really hard to deny creation. It's really only, as one of the authors said in that quote, it's if they prefer to look the other way. There's one guy, and he was a Harvard geneticist as well, and he said, even though these look like just so stories, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, even though these look like just so stories, even though we can't really come through on our promises, he said, we can't let a divine foot in the door. So basically, there's no option. And so sometimes they've chosen things that we are seeing in the world as impossible because the only other option would bring a creator into the scene. And that's something that they don't want. Okay? So we look at fall and judgment, and catastrophe. Okay? And so when we look at this, we look at the flood. And when we look at the flood, obviously we know Scripture, that the wickedness of man, and so he decided other than Noah and his family. We have what are called death poses. And scientists were really confused with the dinosaurs, saying, why do we find so many dinosaurs that are in position that have this weird pose where their head is back? And we see this also in birds that we find in that era. This kind of shows you a little more clearly. So they were saying, what causes this? So there were some studies that were done, and basically what their most reasonable conclusion is these animals died while they were trying to get air. This is actually dying from asphyxiation. They're suffocating. So this is actually a very painful, unfortunately, death for these dinosaurs. And so when we look at it, some Canadians did an experiment, and they took chickens, and they buried the chickens in mud, and they wanted to see, I didn't do the experiment, but they buried the chickens, and they said, you know, we're finding similar things. Now, there's different theories, but the one that seems most reasonable to the ones that people are looking at is that this is caused by a desire to live. that they're trying, but there is no way that they can escape. But these aren't the only death poses. This is and can get up to about 7 to 9 feet long. It's a sea reptile, so it's not technically a dinosaur. It's called an ichthyosaur. But this guy was buried, or this girl was buried so quickly, she was giving birth. So she was actually fossilized in the process of giving birth. We have other we have others that are eating their lunch. We have turtles trying to make other turtles. We have, if my clicker will work, we have nests. This is a Psittacosaurus nest where all of the hatchlings are still there, immediately covered up with their parents. This is one of my favorites. This is from Mongolia, and it's actually called the Fighting Dinosaurs. And I'll give you a better look at it. How long do you think they had to hold that pose? Waiting to get buried. The Triceratops still has the Velociraptor arm in its mouth, okay? Forever in that pose. And then we also find that dinosaurs are buried with creatures that dinosaurs didn't live with. Fish, sea rays. We have land animals and sea animals, ocean animals and freshwater animals, air, birds, and all these things buried. So again, all the fossils tell us is how things died. And they all died together. And so when we look at a lot of these different death poses, it really shows catastrophe. It also shows us some of the evolutionary ideas may be a little wrong. Now, more and more admitting, this is actually a mammal that has a Psittacosaurus, or a dinosaur, in its belly. So it was munching on dinosaurs. We also have a dinosaur. Oh, come on. So that's kind of the A. robustus, or the R. robustus is what they think it would have looked like. Okay? It's also interesting, going back to design, when they started looking at the Psittacosaurus, they found that their skin had 40 layers. Can you imagine? That's like, and it talks about it, cross-grain strengthability of plywood. That is complex design for a purpose. That's not meaningless accident and mutation that just happened to survive. And we can get into some of the statistics about how even getting one protein, one functional protein, they've actually estimated, because 20 amino acids and all this, that actually there are more atoms in the universe than there are possibilities for that to take place. So it's really impossible. And if my clicker, here again, and I'm skipping over. Here is just the analysis showing some of the dinosaur. But we also have birds in the belly of a dinosaur. Wow. Okay? We have birds throughout the fossil record continuous with dinosaurs. Okay? So these are all death poses. And as you can see, when they have longer necks, they're in that back position. Now, Sue is one of the largest T-Rexes we've ever found. When Sue was found, though, Sue's nose was all punched in. And you're like, boy, Sue's nose was punched in? What happened? Sue get in a fight? Well, when they found her, you know what punched her in the face? Her rear end. She was bent completely in two, and her face was smashed into her rear end. Can you imagine? Think of Jurassic Park. Think of taking that T-Rex in Jurassic Park and going, whonk. Takes a lot of power to do something like that. And so these are the kind we see disaster, we see destruction, we see large scale. In the Grand Canyon, in the Red Wall limestone, it's a layer in the Grand Canyon, we have these creatures called nautiloids. And they were a predator type of octopus, or in the same family. They're now extinct. Okay? We find 1 billion of them in a layer in the Grand Canyon in an area that's only about 3 feet thick, stretching 280 miles by over 100 miles. 1 billion. I've never seen 1 billion animals or fish or anything in one given area. This is disastrous. We have layers that go across continents. Okay? Talks about, this is from the Chicago Museum, talking about her pelvis being on her nose. Quite an unlikely position. But we also see death poses in regards to footprints. These are called trace fossils. And I always ask my students, how long would it take to walk on the beach and have your footprint go away? It's pretty quick. And it's interesting because when we actually find The footprints in the fossil record, they seem to be going in a straight line, and we have predator next to prey. Animals don't go in straight lines usually when they're wandering out. They seem to be escaping from something, and for a footprint to last, it has to be almost immediately filled, almost like there's a surge of water that is coming after them. And footprints are not uncommon. You guys are actually part of what they call the dinosaur superhighway. Starting in Mexico, going through Texas and up into Canada, there are well over 1 million tracks of these dinosaurs. Wow, such a catastrophe where something that can't last but a couple of minutes is worldwide. Okay? We also find out that we have dinosaur fossils on Antarctica. We have them above the Arctic Circle. We have polar dinosaurs. We have dinosaurs that were everywhere on the Earth prior to the flood. Now, obviously, the flood buried them. We have evolutionists. One of them he's working with polar dinosaurs down in the bottom of Australia. How did they survive? Really, they can't. The world is very different. Some egg sites. So we find these things all over the world. And it's interesting now, we found in China, Australia, the United States, dinosaurs had to swim out of necessity. They're finding out that some of these tracks, and one in particular has 4 duck-billed dinosaurs running with a sauropod, or a long neck, and another one with 2 kind of T-Rex style dinosaurs. And they can tell that the smaller dinosaurs are picked up and put back down in surges of water. And the larger dinosaur is still going. So they're actually convinced that many of these tracks were made while there were great fluctuations in the water, what we would find in a global flood. So we'll skip. So the waters prevailed mightily, and everything was covered. All flesh died that moved on the earth. Again, it confirms what we see in the fossil record in regards to dinosaurs. We see their amazing design, but we also see a watery destruction that happened worldwide and was catastrophic. Nothing like we see today. Evolutionist evaluations, these are some different sites or bone beds where dinosaurs are found. And he says here at Como Bluff, anyone who cherishes notions that evolution is slow says it's cataclysm. He goes on, he says they're piled in like logs in a jam. Digging dinosaurs, John Horner, the guy who is kind of the centerpiece for Jurassic Park, kind of his idea. This is no ordinary spring flood, one of the streams in the area, but a catastrophic inundation. Now, what about Noah's Ark? When we think about Noah's Ark, and I'm going to go through this quickly, there are great books that have gone over the logistics of the possibility, and they're well worth reading. But if we think about it, the range is from about 6,700 animals to about 21,000. Depending on looking at both extinct animals and animals living today. It was interesting, a college in England, they were working with buoyancy laws. And they said, we're going to take the Bible and we're going to see if this thing would actually float. They were amazed because when they actually looked at it, they found out that it would float quite well and that it could carry over 70,000 animals on top of food and water and other things. So they found out that the dimensions, and there's actually been studies in South Korea, some boating studies that said that the dimensions of the ark could almost have turned over 90 degrees and still righted itself. The stability is amazing. And I can get that information to anyone more interested. But there are good diagrams, and it's interesting because studies have been done on ancient ships in the world. And when we look at ancient ships, we kind of think, why did these common designs come out? One of those is what is called a moon pool. This is a hole in the ship that actually could generate both flowing water throughout the ship, but also movement of air, because it almost uses that to push things in and out. It also could remove waste products. And so these are things that we find in ancient shipbuilding. And a lot of people say, well, the Titanic sank. Well, actually, we have methods that used to take place in the Greek world that just take a lot of time, but are more secure than even those. And so it's easily seen that we can make them. And dinosaurs would have been on the ark. And basically any dinosaur that was not on the ark would have died. And these are what were primarily seen in the fossil record. So there's some great books out there. I won't get into much detail, but go into even to the case where they've considered habits of how they hibernate, the activity of animals when they're terrified. A lot of the times, terrified animals, you have predator and prey that won't eat each other. They'll just stay together because of certain, tendencies of that fear, and we've seen that. So we see about 60 dinosaur families, okay, when we look at it. And so if we really think about it, if we have 60 families, kind of like a dog or a wolf kind having all the dogs, there were really only about 120 dinosaurs on the ark, and they would have been younger. Most dinosaurs are not huge. And similar to reptiles, they grow slowly until they hit a certain age, and then boom, they mature quickly. So it would have been no problem for Noah to have them. And again, we look at the different types of dinosaurs, and they look like just variations on a theme. Okay? They would have been, in a sense, of the same species, would have been able to have kids. There we go. So similar to dinosaurs. Most people don't know that 400 years ago, we didn't have most of the dog breeds we have today. They were bred for specific purposes. Dachshunds, for badger hunting. They were bred to hunt badgers. Man, those are fierce little dogs. Not so much now. But they said from one wolf kind or one wolf pair, this German scientist said, I can come up genetically with at least 151 of the modern dogs. They came from one. You have fuzzy, furry, Chihuahua. You have Great Dane. You have the hairless Chinese dog, whatever that poor thing is. And you have lots of others. Okay? And so we can see that even from secular universities, we have no problem with enough animals. Now, I do think there was God's providence with that as well. But again, the boat was not trying to go anywhere. The boat was just trying to stay afloat. And I think it was made perfect for that. Okay? So we can kind of see, I do hope that in the new heavens and the new earth, there are so many amazing creatures. There's some estimates that say we've lost 70%, some even more, of all the creatures that have ever lived on earth. And that's sad. Okay? So I think that the evidence shows and attests to the Noahic flood. And I do a catastrophic flood geology that goes more into that, and we can always talk about that after. But after the flood then, as we go through the Bible and we look at the different events, especially in Genesis, creation, and then the judgment, Noah's flood. And then we see, did they survive the flood? And so what we do see is we actually see a lot of ancient, if you want to call it, attestation to what we would call dragons. Now, when did the word dinosaur come into existence? Does anybody know? Yeah, I know you know. It really came in 1841, Sir Richard Owen. The word did not exist, but we do have other words that both scripturally and in other cultures they referred to as dragons. Think of it this way. I think the reason we don't believe in dragons is because we've been told so long that they don't exist, that they're mythological. But what's the evidence for it? Have we ever been given any proof that these animals didn't exist? And so maybe we have a different word. Okay, but when we look at it, there. Who is this? If my clicker will work, who's that? Schmog, yes. Who's that? Wait, oh, come on. Who's that? Oh, that's actually a artistic representation of a dinosaur skull that we have. This is Dracoryx hogwartsia. It's named after Harry Potter, okay? But this is what we would think of. It's a type of pachycephalosaur, and we think it's a juvenile. But we have images. We have historical accounts. Beowulf, okay, talks about fighting with a beast Grendel, okay? We have the Epic of Gilgamesh, where we have similar battles with dragons. We have St. George and the dragon. Okay, but this is where it gets fascinating. And there are so many. I'd love to get into all of them. This is actually a Animalia book, or a book on animals from the 1500s. And this is one of the pages. These are animals that the author has either been seen himself, or he was given descriptions of people who had seen different animals in the Mediterranean world. This was from a French man who also wrote a similar book. So were they just creating these things? Or did they see them, or did somebody there? And so these are fascinating encounters. So when we start looking at the cumulative case, we're going to start looking at other examples as well. This is actually a temple in Cambodia. And we're going to look at some carvings. And the carvings, you can see there's a stag, there's a man, there's other animals like pigs. But then you have this animal right here. And it looks very much like a stegosaurus. Okay? And so you may say, well, yeah, maybe it's similar, maybe they just decided to make things up. And we always get this idea that if it's an animal that we don't think lived with us, it had to be made up. But we just keep being told that they couldn't have lived at this time. But we're going to find out that that's not the case with modern science. But if my clicker will work. Okay, but this is kind of like a signature. This is a Sumerian cylinder, and a lot of the times they would use it almost like to sign a name or to identify. And this is from about the 3rd millennium BC. And we have animals that look, and many of these seals have other animals that we know to exist. Okay. Looks very much like Diplodocus. Now, these are fascinating. I will tell you, please, you can look up ichthyostones, but be careful. What ichthyostones are burial stones, and they happened in Peru. They were the Ica people. And so they would put representations on stones and bury them with them. So this is 1,000 years ago. But they also put in other stones that are pornographic. So you need to be careful when you search for them. They are not a Christian people, obviously, and so you have to be careful, okay? And so with these ichthyostones, think of it this way. If dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, and we just started reconstructing this past 150 years ago, there's a blank period where no one saw these creatures. These were in these blank areas. Either they were amazing at their creativity and their ability to create things that actually existed, or they actually saw these animals. And so when we look at this, I mean, I don't think anybody has a doubt of what that is. And then we also have Carlisle Cathedral, and this is from the 1400s. We have a tomb called Bishop Bell's tomb. And around the tomb, he has various animals. And so when you look at the tomb and you look at the bronze around it, you'll start seeing his favorite hunting dog. You'll see some birds he was hunting. You'll see pigs. You'll see fish. You'll actually see animals that are now extinct in England, like the armadillo. And you will also, they're pretty prominent here, aren't they? I heard, is this true? That they had a couple of cases of leprosy that came from the bacteria that was found on. That is true then. Okay. Don't mean to scare you. Don't play with armadillos. Okay, foxes. I want to see one. I've never seen an armadillo. Are they around here? No, okay. Well, okay. But when we look at it, we also see on his tomb the intertwining of two large, what look like sauropods. And it's interesting, one has a tail that doesn't have anything on it. So again, similar to a Diplodocus, but the other one actually has two horns. And it wasn't until recently that we found what was called Shunnosaurus. Shunnosaurus is a long-necked dinosaur that actually had spikes on its tail. Very similar to what we see on Bishop Bell's tomb. Okay? Then we go to a place in France. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I will butcher it. Château de Bois. Does that sound good? Okay? And again, we have animals that seem to be breathing fire. But anyways, this is a tapestry. Anybody a Indiana Jones fan? Tapestries? Okay. So we have this. Now, around on this tapestry, we have other animals that are all known to us. But then we come to this creature, and we come to actually this creature's baby. And actually modern representations of a duck-billed dinosaur called the Maiasaur looks almost exactly like this. So what was on this tapestry? And remember, in the 1500s, we had those Animalia books that had similar animals. We have it in the Southwest. I don't know if there's any down here, but it's hard to see. This is kind of an artistic rendition. This is my favorite. This is in Wupatki in Arizona going into Flagstaff, and they actually call it Puff the Magic Dragon. It's a great. So again, we have a cumulative effect from all around the world. We have also, so this is in the American Southwest, we have in China, and we're going to go through this really quickly, but there's a culture, okay, come on, called the Hongshan culture. And this culture died out about 2900 BC, according to different evolutionary scientists. But what they found is they found that this culture made medallions. They made medallions of things they knew, but they also made medallions of things that, of course, were told or mythological because man never saw them. Which again, why? What is the evidence that we never saw them? Because it seems like we have a lot of artwork, we have a lot of diagrams that seem to show these animals that supposedly haven't been seen for 65 million years, but my gosh, we're good at representing them. Things we don't know. And again, look, this looks like a Protoceratops. Okay? Just amazing. And these are animals that we know. So if we're thinking reasonably, and if we haven't discovered them except for the last 150 years, it seems reasonable that we have so many close representations that it kind of beggars possibility that this was just by chance and accident. Okay, we have it in Greece, we have it in Rome, we have it in Mesoamerica. These are from Latin America. This next one is from Mexico, if I can get it up. Okay? It is worldwide. We also have when Marco Polo went and was going into China, he wrote in his journals that the emperor's carriage or the emperor's cart was pulled by dragons and that they bred dragons. Okay? We have other people in ancient history that talk about, Herodotus talks about dinosaurs. Josephus actually talks about things that we would consider dinosaurs. Okay? And the Bible, behold Behemoth. I eats grass like an ox, tail stiff like a cedar. And these are not the little cedars. These are cedars of Lebanon that we may equate with what we think of with the redwoods. These were enormous trees. Okay? So what is Behemoth? We have poop. Don't you love poop? We have poop, and we look at it's called coprolite, actually, but we've analyzed it, and you know how they've been told that dinosaurs never lived when there was grass. Maybe you didn't know that, but we analyzed the coprolite from these dinosaurs, and we found what? They ate grass. So, and they've had to revise because of that. But when we think about the idea of how the Bible describes Behemoth, it is not a hippo. A hippo doesn't have a tail like a cedar, either does an elephant. We think of some of these animals that unfortunately have gone. We think of Leviathan. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press his tongue with a cord? And I actually was working with Rick last night because I found a source that says the two Hebrew words mean wreathed and dragon. And so we're working on the etymology. But the source I got it to, I feel, is reliable. And so when we look at this, can you draw it out? Out of his mouth go flaming torches, sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke. You guys, we have descriptions of things that we have been told are mythological. But we have animals, we have bugs, we have different organisms that have such effects. Why do we not believe it? It's because we've been told it's not true. But why is it not true? Because we look at the evidence and it seems that man and dinosaur seem to have occupied. And there's 100 different reasons why they went extinct. First, the brains were too small. They did have really small brains. Okay? Couldn't compete with the mammals. Other animals ate their eggs. Disease or glandular disorders, constipation, I love that one. Okay, cosmic rays, changes in the magnetic field, meteor impact, which is now going out of popularity because of some problems. Drastic change in climate, which I think would have come after. Really, when we look at the flood, it's the only mechanism that really can create an ice age as we see on the Earth. It's fascinating. I do another talk on that, too much to get into now. But I think hunting, Flintstones, oh yeah, Brontosaurus burgers, all the way. But the global flood, the climate would have changed if before the flood, even places like Antarctica and these polar places now had dinosaurs. We found palm trees in Antarctica, okay? If those things lived there, things were very different. And I think those drastic changes caused these type of animals difficulty in surviving. And I do think they were hunted. I think they were feared. I mean, look at a T-Rex. T-Rex comes walking down your street. Oh, he's probably fine. He's friendly. No, you kill him, okay? But this is my favorite. Development of psychotic suicide factors. Seriously, a serious idea. Yeah. Hey, let's go jump. Okay. So it's some of those things. So I really think that without going into even greater detail, creation, they are without excuse. Everything we see in the fossil record attests to a worldwide flood. We have diverse accounts. We have cumulative evidence. You can discard one here or there, but the full effect. And do you know that there are flood legends? There are over 500 cultures with flood legends. It's amazing when you start, and it actually bothers quite a few atheists, because in sociology, usually a combined story usually means they experience the same event or they come from the same culture. And so it really points to a flood. So the first one, scientific corroboration. Thank you guys for your patience. I know I'm supposed to be done talking right about now. Will you bear with me for a little longer? Okay. So radiocarbon. When we look at radiocarbon, I'm not sure if you guys remember radiocarbon when you were in school, but basically the cosmic rays hit nitrogen. Freaks out nitrogen, nitrogen becomes carbon, has an identity crisis, okay? Then what happens is this percentage of carbon-14 with other carbon is taken in by the process of photosynthesis as the plants are making their energy. Then, of course, we all eat plants, okay, or animals that eat plants, and so that carbon is transferred to us. Well, when we die, you know what? We don't eat anymore. Amazing, isn't it? Since we don't eat anymore, we no longer bring in carbon-14. Now the carbon-14, it's realized its true identity and it wants to be nitrogen again. And so what it does is that it breaks down every 5,700 years. And so when we mean a half-life, this is kind of like an egg timer. Okay, so when we look at a half-life, and I was just talking to a gentleman tonight that's been doing some studies in half-lives, but look at it this way. We have a triceratops, beautiful as he is, he kicks the bucket, okay? As he dies, then we have a certain amount of carbon-14. Every 5,700 years, according to evolutionary theory, we can then, if my clicker will work, we lose half of it. Another 5,700 years, half of that is gone. And we're not going to talk about Zeno's paradox if anybody wants to. But eventually, what happens is, by 100,000 years, it's no longer detectable. So if you find carbon-14 in a once living thing, then it has to be under that age of limit. We even have people like P.Z. Myers that call us ignorant clowns for even trying to look for it, which unfortunately is not good science. Because carbon-14 does not, it has an upper bound. He even says of 50,000, but it's higher. His summary basically is it's impossible, it cannot be, and only an idiot would look for it. But thankfully, we have a lot of idiots in the world. And we have good idiots, which is good, okay? And so with good idiots comes good science. And so in 1997, a group that was started by the Institute for Creation Research called RATE, Radioisotopes in the Age of the Earth, they took in and they got basically from every level of the geologic column, and they sent it to some of the world's best radio-14 or carbon-14 dating facilities, and there was undecayed carbon-14 in the entire geologic record. So if you look at the very bottom, if there's undecayed carbon-14 in creatures that were once living, the limit, according to science, is 100,000 years. That means the top limit. Now, that doesn't mean that's the age of it. That just means it's a limit. Okay? So the entire record that they say is millions upon millions going down into the Precambrian at 600 plus million really is only showing an age of less than 100,000. So when we look at the geologic column, if it truly is age, that as you go down, we're going into millions of years, then you're basically only going to get carbon-14. I guess it's kind of funny watching me try to get this going, isn't it? This is the level that we would find carbon-14. That is the depth. But their research basically said that it went all the way down into the Precambrian. Oh. There we go. And that is where our dinosaurs are. Now, there was a recent project called the iDino project, and they basically took the horn of a triceratops. They found both soft tissue in it. They found osteocytes and other things that they were analyzing, but they also looked at it for carbon-14. And within that study, they dated many other things. So looking at that, the entire column is limited less than 100,000 years. So when they did their studies in this recent iDino project, what they found out, and these are actually some of the dates that they got, and one of the ceratopsian dates, so they sent it to 5 different laboratories, and CRSQ is the Creation Research Society Quarterly, so it's an association of scientists that do peer-reviewed papers and that. But this is some of their listing. And so when they came back with the carbon-14 dates, this is a ceratopsian, or the family of Triceratops. And they said that this creature died 26,300 years ago. Now, as creationists, we wonder, well, that year's a little flawed. We're not going to get into the problems of radiometric dating and some of the assumptions. But what it does show is from their methodology, from their science, they're basically claiming that this animal died less than 27,000 years ago. Okay? Well, if we take the evolutionary view that man has been here for quite a long time, then they could have lived together. Now, we think dates are different. Right now, I'm just trying to show you the reasonableness of our position as creationists, that evolutionists are having a hard time coming to terms with. When you run in evolutionary circles, most of them are not talking about some of these. Okay? And so I think that the radiocarbon footprint that we see throughout the geological column is powerful evidence for a young Earth. And again, we can work on it to show why some of these numbers show ages that we think are different. Okay? And then the last one that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about soft tissue remains. And so it was interesting. Mary Schweitzer is the scientist, and she's actually in Montana. She actually works under John Horner, or Jack Horner. And this is the bone that the first finds came from. Now, the find she started finding earlier, she finally published in 2005. And in 2005, and it's interesting, she ran the test. There was a lot of things that happened that shouldn't have happened that made the information available. First, the bone was broke, and then it was left in a solution too long. And when they came back, so it was error after error, that kind of made them see what they had never seen before. And so within this bone, she said a thin slice of T-Rex bone glowed amber. Kind of, dramatic. Says blood vessels snaked through the bone matrix, tiny chambers known as lacunae, house bone forming cells. Then a colleague took one look at them and shouted, "You've got red blood cells. You've got red blood cells." It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? From laboratory science, we know they can't survive that long. These were fresh T-Rex bones. Some are impossible. This just can't be what I think it is. Okay? Luckily, she's a good scientist. She published. She took ridicule. We found so many things. These are actually photos from that initial publication. Okay? It's kind of neat. We're not going to get any Jurassic Park, unfortunately. There's a lot of reasons why. But they also, even in other experiments, they find out that it's flexible, that it actually retains its shape. You can pull it and it'll come back. Okay? These are, scientists like to publish because they want people to know what they discovered. And so when we look at this, these lines are different types of animals, not just dinosaurs, where soft tissue has been found. This is actually a listing of original tissue throughout the fossil record going all the way down to the lowest layers, showing that we have soft tissue or biomolecules going down. So if you basically look at the geologic column, now probably the longest lasting biomolecule would probably be collagen. Collagen, they believe, could, in best case scenarios, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, could last 900,000 years. Okay? But almost everything else, we know DNA's half-life of about 521 years as a molecule. So we have actually found dinosaur DNA. It's amazing. So if we look at the entire fossil record, soft tissues are not a rare find. Now that we actually have found them, they've tried to say, oh, they were biofilm, they were a byproduct. But really, we're past that now. We've had so many finds that it is, yes, this is actual tissue. Second summary, it's in the entire fossil record, from the lowest levels to the top levels. So if we think about that, grand summary, maybe the entire geologic cake is not that old. If we're finding DNA, if we're finding these biomolecules, it shows a greatly reduced age for these things that we have taken for millions of years old. Again, confirmation of a younger Earth. And really, age is perception in most ways. And really, in all honesty, if I would ask most of you, how do you know the age of the Earth? And many of you may say, well, it's this many millions of years old, maybe not you, but in a group. But if I asked them to give me the reason why, almost none of them would be able to tell me. Interesting, do you know that the 4.6 billion years we get for the date of the Earth actually comes from the dating of an asteroid, a meteor? The meteor was dated, but the assumption was that that meteor formed at the same time as the Earth did. So you see, evolution was built into the process. It's kind of interesting to date something from outside of the thing you're dating. Doesn't seem to make sense, okay? But we have things within the Earth, biomolecules, that show us ages of things that are showing, there seems to be a problem. But it goes very well with the creationist idea. One reviewer basically said he didn't care what the data said. He knew that what she was finding wasn't possible. Now, this is good science. Well, what data would convince you? None. Well, that's not very good science, okay? And so these are really rocking. There are reactions. So impossible, my mind is made up for this gentleman, okay? Not good science. There we go. These are some of the different body materials, the biomolecules that have been found, and all of these, we can look through experimentation to see how long they would last. And as I said, DNA that has been found. And one scientist basically said genetic material is not supposed to last over such long periods, not by a long shot. He said when they were working on moa bones, he said genetic material deteriorates halves every 521 years. So if we basically look at this, and we look at our dear little Triceratops who keeps dying for us, and he dies again, and we have all of his DNA material. Again, every 521 years, you have half as much as you had prior. You can see that within a couple thousand years, at the most 20,000 years, you have no more DNA. So if we're finding this in the geologic column, this raises huge questions, because we know from operational science that certain things cannot last that long, where historic science is making assumptions, okay? But we should make assumptions based on what we know is actually happening today. And so when we look at this, I really think, and we went quickly and I was a little back and forth, but I don't think that creation, I think that the universal understanding of a beginning, as science shows us, points to God. And the intricate design, both in dinosaurs and other animals. I like to talk about the blood clotting system. Do you know that for your blood to clot, over 200 reactions take place? If one of them goes wrong, and it's kind of cool, one of them is called Christmas factor. But if one of them goes wrong, you either clot or bleed to death. That is complex, and those are all in your system ready to activate. You guys, we are so complex, it's unbelievable. And with epigenetics, they're showing that we're beyond what we even could imagine in complexity. Okay? So we are without excuse. If you really look at nature and truly take in the complexity, I don't think you can do anything but a designer. Fall and judgment. We have proof of a worldwide flood in many ways. We have it in the fossil record. We have it in the recollection, the remembering of people who passed down those stories, Bible and many other. We have diverse accounts of people interacting with these animals that we later called dinosaurs. We have pictures. We have artwork. We also then have scientific corroboration in studies in radiocarbon that shows that if it only can last so long and we have it in the most bottom layer, we have a limit. And so it's not as old as people have said. And then the finding of soft tissue, and you know what really still blows my mind is I take kids and we go to places like UC Berkeley. I train them for about 9 months and then I take them to UC Berkeley. We bring in atheists, we go talk to professors, we get them involved in many other worldviews. And I'm asking people on the Berkeley campus where if you're familiar with genetics, CRISPR-Cas9, basically many of the scientists at Berkeley, very smart. Almost no person, even in the field of paleontology, had heard of unfossilized dinosaur bones. It's amazing to me. They've been around for well over 20 years, or about 20 years. Okay? So we have, whoops, then my clicker worked and I didn't want to. Okay? And so I think that is just amazing. And I think when we take the full effect, we can see that the first chapters of Genesis are correct in the creation. We see the 6 through 9 chapters attesting to the destruction that we see the world over. We then see in cases like Job, which many people believe may be the oldest written book that we have, showing animals that if we looked at now, we would talk to about dinosaurs. And this is all over the world as well. Then we also have scientific corroboration with matter that is found in living beings and how we can date that. And so I really think that we can stand and be comfortable as Christians, standing firm on the reliability from Scripture, starting in Genesis. And so just really quick, and we'll get to questions. And I do want to say we've come into an age where we really have an us versus them mentality. I'm not just saying in the church. I'm saying all over. We really need to be able to interact with people and to have disagreements, but to love the person above all, and to act as Christ would. And so we need to show care, we need to listen. So resources again, I work with an institute called Alpha Omega Institute out of Grand Junction. Our website is discovercreation.org. If you go to our website and you use our search engine, it'll first look on our website, but if you click the radial that says Discover Creation Search Engine, it'll search the 10 top young earth creationist sites, and it will give you everything from layman articles to very technical articles. Great for research, ICR, creation, and just some resources. Thank you guys for your patience, and I apologize for the difficulty. Ouch, thank you. What are questions that you have that maybe I touched on or maybe I didn't touch on? Yeah. The meanest dinosaur? Wow. Well, you know, I heard T-Rex is kind of like a big putty cat. No, I would say, you know, from the amount, I mean, we have huge, like, alligator kind of creatures called Sarasuchus, but I'll probably go with T-Rex. Does that make you happy? Yeah. Yes?
Any human dinosaur
It's interesting. There are claimed ones, and usually when I do presentations, I try to use evidence that I feel is very difficult to overcome. If there's a lot of controversy, because when I find out when I go into public settings, if they find one thing that they can show that is faulty, then they throw everything else out. But there have been, and I actually have an interview that was given to me from a friend that works at AOI. And this gentleman had gone down to the Paluxy sites and to some other sites. He had actually worked with the Houston Police Department, and he actually had been trained in being able to look at footprints and pressures and stuff. And he said that there were 17 points in the human footprint that would distinguish, I think it was 17 or 11. I can get you the interview if you want. But he said these footprints that were inside the dinosaur tracks had those impressions. So he, as an investigator, believed, he was convinced that they were human footprints. Now, there's been other scientists, John Morris, who looked at some of these track sites as well and felt that it was ambiguous, that he couldn't really determine. Now, interesting, and we get this question a lot, there is actually one purported human skeletal find from the Cretaceous. It's actually, they call him the Bronze Man out of Moab, Utah. And he was found in that era. But ironically, we haven't found any. But think of it this way. If the floodwaters are gradually rising, the most mobile creatures are going to live the longest. That's why when I told you about that ceratopsian death site, all of them were adults. It seemed like all the weak, all the children were killed. So you see this as we go up kind of the superhighway, we see the more and more able animals to survive probably did. Those that could survive the longest probably would end up being towards the end of the flood, and that being the case probably had a low fossilization rate. When we think about it, it's less than 1,000% of the fossil record is dinosaurs. So we have a very little amount. And we actually only have about 3,000 close to complete dinosaurs. A lot of the times in museums, you see museums and you see duplications of others that have been found in other places. We actually don't have a lot. We're still kind of figuring out some dinosaurs and what they actually looked like. It's interesting, in the early dinosaur days, Iguanodon was one of the first dinosaurs that they really started piecing together, and they had this piece. And they're like, what do we do with it? So they stuck it on his nose. And so he had this little horn. So the earliest thing, until, a couple decades later, they found it was his toe. So you have to find the complete. So it's, so many who I trust have attested that they have seen those. I have not seen them personally, but I trust them. I just don't use them. Yeah. Other questions? Yes. How big does a raptor get? Well, what we actually saw in Jurassic Park that they called a raptor was actually a dinosaur called a Deinonychus. And it's a little larger. Raptors really aren't that big. Now, I don't know what the largest raptor was, but considerably smaller than in the movie. If I'm thinking correctly, and don't quote me, I'm thinking maybe 6 to 7 feet at the most. But they weren't as big as Deinonychus, who got bigger. Did that? Oh, are you raising your hand? Nope, just a jumper. Yes.
You mentioned unfossilized bones?
Yes.
What kind of unfossilized bones?
So what happened is the bone actually broke. They started looking in, and so these are actual items that you would find in a bone that had not turned to stone. They actually were still the biomolecules. So we have things like hemoglobin. We have, collagen. We have, like we talked about, the DNA. So they can actually take the partial molecule. It is not turned into stone, and it is not degenerated. Because usually when an animal dies, an internal process happens. Even if you take like animals eating it and other things away, molecules will break down on their own. And so these are molecules that haven't broken down yet, and they haven't turned into stone. And so we can actually look at them, and we've done experiments like they did the experiments on the Moa bones with DNA material, trying to find out how long it takes to decay. And so they basically said after, thousands of years, it's all gone. So laboratory experiments say that these molecules can't last as biomolecules forever. They have a set limit. So wow, if we're finding them, that we must not be beyond that limit. But they're supposed to be 65 million years ago. And even if we give them the longest, meaning the collagen, of 900,000 years, that's still 65 times below what they need. Okay? So we have massive problems. Yes?
It's just amazing to me to hear you talking this way. I don't know. I bump into people at the grocery store.
Uh-huh.
And the topic of the Lord our God comes up.
Yeah.
And when I think of God creating, just because he says it,
Mm-hmm.
what a God is
Oh, it is.
And if I think of DNA, I mean, I don't understand it, but
Oh.
God would have created that, and he would have programmed into it
Mm-hmm.
every human being who has walked the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And if from what I understand,
Uh-huh.
in the scriptures, he designed it out of love.
Oh, yeah.
So, and wanting every human being to know his law,
Right.
and every human being was programmed into, and there was
Oh, yeah.
still more to come, programmed into that
Yep.
original DNA.
Oh, yeah. I want to raise my hand and say amen. Yeah? No, I agree. And what we're finding out is the diversity. They really say that in genetics now, we're at the same point before Francis and Crick discovered the shape, the double helix. It's amazing. They've done studies that have shown, like in certain birds, when we think about like Darwin's finches, what they're seeing happening is almost like a biofeedback loop. They used to say that, well, the seeds got hard and big because of the dry weather, and so if you had a small beak, you would die because you couldn't break through the outer crust. But what we're finding is but what we're actually seeing is that there's something within the parents that is getting information from the outside that are turning on and off genes that basically say, oh, you know what? Now, they're not thinking this, you know what? The weather's changing, the barometric pressure is this and all that. But all of a sudden, the body is noticing these changes, turning genes on and off for the next generation to have a larger beak. I mean, that's just amazing. That's mind-numbing in how complex that is. Yeah. No, I unfortunately do not. Now, there are some people, I think it's called Maleke, I can't remember the name of it. There are some people in the Congo where there is some swampland that humans may have never been into that talk about a creature that seems to be a type of a long neck, some kind of a sauropod. We have no visual evidence of it. We have different things. Could there be? I guess yes. You think of Loch Ness and you think of those. Could a plesiosaur? My son, actually, no joke, he said, Dad, he was going to become an marine biologist. The ocean freaks me out, Dad. He said, there are big things down there we've never seen. What if we have like a huge megalodon and I'm out there? And I said, well, okay, kid. So no, I do not believe they're here. I believe they've gone extinct like so many other things that unfortunately we have killed off, the environment has changed, that they just couldn't survive. Yeah. Yes?
So you talk about the turning on and off the genes
Yes.
generation. That be confused with before or with evolution?
Well, one of my idea, well, not my idea, but discussions that we've had is that the idea of Lamarckian, if you're familiar with different types of evolution, Lamarckian evolution was believed to be that traits were passed down to the next generation. So I'm actually anticipating there may be kind of a Lamarckian revival saying, ha, see, they can pass it down. But I think the complexity will overwhelm any idea of random checks and accident. And really, when you get into the numbers, the probability, I mean, like we said, of a single protein forming, the likelihood is nil. It's impossible. But to think of the different complexity within every organism, all the changes that have to take place, they're also finding, and I haven't done enough research on this, but I'll throw it out just to make you aware. One of the guys in our group has studied what are called orphan genes. And these are sets of genes that seem to be found in only particular species. They're shared with no other species. So it seems like, almost like there is a set of genes almost showing us that this is very distinct and could not have come from any other ancestor other than the one that has these genes. So they're very, what we would call in creationism, kind specific. Because kind is the term that the Bible used, Berriman, but it's not directly equatable to species. And it's hard with species anyways, because you have species that are named different species, but they can have offspring. We've heard of like zorses, or we've heard of, what are the ligers, and those that supposedly are, they can still breed and have offspring. So, yeah. Yes. And Nephilim? Oh, the Nephilim question. Oh, God, I should let you take that one. I would not say necessarily, other than reference in biblical literature. The Nephilim are one of those things, and I do want to talk to you about that tonight. Nephilim are seeming to be these. From my understanding, they're humans. Some people will try to say that they're angels who have mated with humans. I don't think that's the case, even though Son of God in many cases refers to the angelic beings and that. I don't think there's necessarily any correlation other than they were in the days of Noah. When the earth had become extremely wicked, when God's judgment came. So they were both there. They both experienced God's judgment. But that's about all I can think of. Yes.
I think one more.
Oh. Say that again. Lamarckian. Lamarck was a French, and he was actually, well, there's confusion because he wasn't necessarily, well, we won't get into that. Lamarck, though, believed that what happened is as the animal stretched his neck, then it would pass on to the next generation and all these different things. So it was inheritable changes that could be passed on. And so really, when the mutation idea, when neo-Darwinism came in, the idea of the mutation, kind of threw it out. But what we see is with the genetics of epigenetics, where now these things are interacted with the environment, then it changes genes, it has kind of an appearance of that inheritable changes, which Lamarck came up with. So, yeah. I would consider, you mean what we actually see as creationists? Yeah, oh no, I think it's definitely adaptation. As she was saying, the adaptation, I think God has built into the complexity of the genome that we could survive in the multiple types of environments that we would be exposed to. And I think, obviously, with a foreknowledge of God prior to the fall and subsequent to the fall. So no, I think that those are adaptive behaviors. And it's interesting, one last thing when it comes to adaptive behaviors, for evolution to take place, they actually have to have a separation of the mutated organism. Because what happens is evolution is actually a conservative process. It weeds out the weak. And so what happens is, as a conservative process, those weird mutations would die off. So give you an example. When you take mutated bacteria, when they're all alone and maybe they can fight against different antibiotics, because actually the functionality has diminished. The bacteria actually has broken parts, and so it can no longer process the antibiotic. But when you put it into a healthy culture of normal, they usually die off. So it's evolution has to have the organism separated, and this is where population genetics comes in and that. But we find out that it works in the favor of creation. Evolution actually does, or what we could call natural selection. I don't want to call it evolution per se. So, sorry.
Oh, you've given us all that we hoped for and more.
I hope so.
Yeah, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Scott will be here in Las Cruces at Mission Lutheran Church on Thursday at 6:30. So if you know anyone that's out there or you want to drive up there, you'll have more chance to hear it again and also ask more questions. We want to raffle off our door prizes here real quick. But thank you so much. This is great. An introduction to so many things for so many of us and an expansion of some of the knowledge that many people also had. Again, can we have a round of applause one more time? Thank you. Does anybody have your raffle ticket still in your possession? All right, let's bring it up here. Also, we're so blessed to be able to have you come down, fly down, and spend the week here. It doesn't happen for free, and so it's all being funded by donations, the free will offering box we have in the back. We definitely encourage you to help support this big effort for the whole week of your teaching, and we want to definitely give a good impression of El Paso and our gratitude and our desire to have more and more of your work in the future. So, all right, so we need some help drawing names. So 7 prizes, and the first one, Guide to Dinosaurs. Timothy Essery. Woohoo! All right, the next one is The Echoes of the Jurassic DVD. Deborah Adame. Yes. All right, the next one is Evolution's Achilles Heels. Cool warrior on the cover. Giving me all the names to pronounce. Jane Bannister. Woohoo! There you go. The Fossil Record. Summer Pettigrew. Woohoo! This next one, Dragons, Legends and Lore of Dinosaurs. Rachel Miller. Must be present to win. Rachel Miller, are you here? Rachel Miller. All right, we'll draw another name. Savannah Meyer. Woohoo! See, if they were drawing the names still, we'd be Censored Science, The Suppressed Evidence by Bruce Malone. Jonathan Hidalgo. There you go. Is this the last one? God's Big Book of Animals. And it's heavy. Lydia Williams. Woohoo! Schlack, Marisa Schlack. Thank you again. And thank you all for being here. Can we have a round of applause for all the kids? Amazing. Amazing. So you need to make sure to wake up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning and say, "Did you see that?" And then say your favorite dinosaur, okay? Like, knock on your parents' bedroom doors, 6 o'clock in the morning. My favorite dinosaur was... Oh, sorry. Just kidding, kids. Just kidding, kids. Let your parents sleep in. Again, free will offering. If you have any questions, you want to linger and visit for a little while, I'm not going to close the doors right away. But many thanks to everyone who provided food and all the Zion members who helped provide hospitality. Krisha for helping organize things, Jim for the pizza. What a blessing to do all this together.
We should give an applause to Pastor Stephen and to Krisha for all that they've done.
All right.